Okay, so today we're diving into a world where charisma and controversy kind of collide, I guess.
Yeah.
We're talking about Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Oh, yeah.
You know the name,
The
right?
Kennedys, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
steeped in political legacy, obviously, but also, touched by tragedy.
For sure.
And RFK Jr.'s story, takes us everywhere from environmental activism to a really controversial stance on vaccines
Yeah.
and even a presidential run.
Oh, yeah, he did that too.
It's pretty wild.
It is.
So is he a genuine force for good? Or is there something a little more calculated going on? I
Right.
think that's what we're really here to unpack today.
That's a great question, and it's really, I think, at the heart of what this show is about, right?
Yeah.
Grifter or gifted.
Yeah.
Figuring out if someone is really changing the world or just playing the game.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think with RFK Jr., you really can't ignore the weight of that Kennedy name.
No, you can't.
His father and his uncle, both assassinated.
Yeah.
I mean, it casts a long shadow.
It does.
And he's also been open about his own struggles early on with drug abuse.
Sure.
It's a lot to unpack even before we get to the work that he's actually done.
Absolutely. Yeah, it all adds these layers to his story.
Yeah.
But I think a good place to start is with his environmental work.
Okay.
That's really where he kind of initially made his mark, right?
Yeah.
He became a very successful lawyer, taking on these big corporations and winning these cases that had real impact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, his work with Riverkeeper, cleaning up the Hudson River.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
And then he went global with Waterkeeper Alliance,
Right.
advocating for clean water access. I mean, worldwide. I mean,
Yeah.
that's tangible change, right?
It is.
So how do we square that with all the controversy that seems to follow him everywhere?
Yeah. Well, that's where things get a little bit more complicated.
Yeah.
His stance on vaccines, for example,
Right.
has made him a very polarizing figure.
For sure.
I think it's crucial to remember,
Yeah.
that the World Health Organization, the vast majority of medical professionals,
Right.
affirm the safety and the efficacy of vaccines.
Yeah.
They prevent countless deaths each year.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is something that's really important to remember.
Yeah, but RFK Jr. has repeatedly, voiced his opposition to vaccines.
He had.
He even founded Children's Health Defense, formerly the World Mercury Project,
Yeah.
to advocate against them.
Yeah.
He insists, he's not anti-vaccine,
Yeah.
but it's hard to see it any other way.
It is. It's certainly been a point of major contention,
Yeah.
and his organization has been accused of spreading misinformation, especially, targeting young parents, minorities on social media.
Right.
They've even organized these anti-vaccine rallies. In fact, some of their accounts were actually removed from platforms like Facebook and Instagram for violating their misinformation policies.
Wow, they were actually deplatformed.
They were, yeah.
That's serious stuff.
It is.
And then there's his book,
Oh, yeah, the book.
The Real Anthony Fauci,
The Real Anthony Fauci.
where he basically accuses Fauci of exaggerating the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty bold claim, right?
It is, and it drew sharp criticism from the medical community.
Yeah, I bet.
Dr. Ashish Jha, who you might remember, was the former White House COVID-19 response coordinator.
Yeah.
Even suggested that RFK Jr.'s nomination later on for a major health position was more about power, than it was about public health.
So it wasn't just a difference of opinion on vaccines.
Right.
It was about control over these massive health programs.
That's right.
Okay, so we've got this guy who's been both a successful environmental advocate
Right.
and a purveyor of what many consider to be dangerous misinformation.
Yeah.
Where does his political career fit into all of this?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting, I think.
Right.
He launched a 2024 presidential campaign,
He did.
starting as a Democrat and then switching to an independent run.
Wow.
He attracted a very diverse group of supporters,
I bet.
including some Republicans and folks who are just generally distrustful of institutions.
Yeah, right.
It seemed to tap into this deep vein of anti-establishment sentiment that's been growing in recent years,
Yeah, for sure.
So
But his own family didn't exactly rally behind him, did they?
they did not.
I remember reading that his siblings were extremely critical
They were.
and called his decision to endorse Trump a betrayal of their father's values.
Yeah, betrayal of the values that their father and their whole family hold most dear.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty huge.
It is.
Yeah.
And it highlights this complex relationship he has with his own family legacy, right?
Yeah.
The Kennedy name. It's loaded with both idealism and, for some, disillusionment. So
Right.
it's an interesting thing.
It's interesting how he positions himself,
Uh-huh.
consistently as this truth teller,
Yeah.
someone fighting against censorship and corruption.
He does, yeah.
And that kind of message can resonate with a lot of people,
It can.
especially at a time when trust in institutions is so low.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it also raises some questions, right?
It does.
Like where do you draw the line between healthy skepticism and embracing conspiracy theories?
That's the question.
Yeah.
That's what makes RFK Jr. such a challenging figure to analyze,
For sure.
You have this real positive impact on the environment,
Right.
and then these fringe beliefs that contradict scientific consensus.
Right.
So the question becomes, what are his true motivations?
Yeah.
Is it genuine concern,
Right.
or is it about power and influence?
Yeah. Those are the questions, right?
Yeah.
So he ultimately drops out of the race, endorses Trump.
Yeah.
It does.
And then Trump says he wants to nominate him for Secretary of Health and Human Services.
Wild, right?
I mean, that's just wild.
It is a pretty dramatic turn of events.
Yeah.
And it gets us back to that core question we're exploring,
Right.
grifters or gifted.
Yeah.
With someone like RFK Jr., it's not easy to answer.
It's not.
He seems to embody both sides of that coin.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It feels like we're just scratching the surface here.
On.
There's so much more to explore.
There is. It really is, yeah. And to your point about scratching the surface,
Yeah.
I think it's worth digging a little deeper into why RFK Jr.'s message resonates with certain groups,
Okay, yeah, let's get into that.
Yeah.
Because you're right, it's not just about him as an individual.
Right.
There's a whole cultural context here that I think we need to consider.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We live in a time where distrust of institutions is really at an all-time high.
Yeah. You see it everywhere in politics, media, even science.
Right.
So when someone comes along and positions themselves as this outsider, as this truth teller, willing to challenge the status quo,
Right.
it can be very appealing to folks who feel like their voices aren't being heard,
Right. Like they've been lied to or manipulated by the powers that be.
Exactly.
And then you add social media to the mix,
Oh, yeah.
where misinformation can spread like wildfire.
Absolutely.
And it creates this perfect storm for someone like RFK Jr. to gain a following.
It does. Social media has fundamentally changed the way we consume information.
Yeah.
It's created these echo chambers where people are only exposed to information that reinforces their existing beliefs.
Right.
So if you're already inclined to distrust authority
Yeah.
or to believe in conspiracy theories,
Yes.
you can easily find yourself, down a rabbit hole
Yeah, for sure.
of misinformation.
And it becomes harder and harder
Mhm.
to distinguish between what's true and what's not.
It does.
You mentioned that RFK Jr.'s own family has been critical of him.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you think his father, Robert F. Kennedy Sr., would make of all this.
It's impossible to say for sure, of course, but RFK Sr. was deeply committed to social justice,
Right.
to fighting for the marginalized and the oppressed.
Yeah.
It's difficult to reconcile that legacy
Right.
with RFK Jr.'s alignment with figures like Donald Trump, whose policies often exacerbated inequality and division.
Yeah, it's a pretty stark contrast.
It is.
And it raises questions about whether RFK Jr. is truly interested in serving the common good,
Yeah.
or if it's more about personal ambition and a desire for power.
That's a key question,
Yeah.
that we need to grapple with when we're trying to determine if someone is a grifter or gifted, right?
Right.
Are their actions driven by a genuine desire to make a positive impact, or are they primarily motivated by self-interest?
Right, and it's not always easy to tell,
It's not.
especially with someone like RFK Jr.,
Right.
who has this complicated mix of admirable qualities
Right.
and deeply concerning beliefs,
Yeah.
He clearly has a passion for environmental issues,
He does.
but then he also promotes these unfounded claims about vaccines that have the potential to cause real harm.
That's right. And it's that dissonance
Yeah.
that makes his story so fascinating and so unsettling.
Yeah.
He's this compelling figure who can inspire people with his environmental work, but then turn around and sow distrust
Right.
in science and public health institutions.
So how do we make sense of that? How do
Yeah.
we reconcile those seemingly contradictory aspects of his personality and his actions?
Well, I think it's important to remember that people are complex.
Yeah.
We all have contradictions within us. And someone can be both genuinely passionate about a cause and also susceptible to misinformation and conspiracy theories.
But where do we draw the line?
Yeah.
At what point do those beliefs become so harmful that they outweigh any good intentions?
That's a tough question.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a simple answer,
Yeah.
but I think it's crucial to consider the impact of someone's words and actions.
Yeah.
If they're spreading misinformation that could lead to people making decisions that harm themselves or others, then we have a responsibility to speak out and challenge those claims.
Right. Free speech is important.
It is.
But it doesn't mean we have to give a platform to dangerous ideas without question.
That's right. And I think it's also essential to examine the broader context in which these figures operate, In RFK Jr.'s case, his rise to prominence, it coincides with this broader trend of distrust in institutions and the spread of misinformation online.
For sure.
He's not operating in a vacuum.
Right.
He's tapping into something that's already there.
So it's not just about him as an individual.
Right.
It's about understanding the social and cultural forces that have created this environment where someone like him can thrive.
Precisely. And that's why I think it's so important to have these conversations, to really delve into the complexities of these figures and the movements they represent.
Right.
We need to be able to discern between genuine visionaries and those who are simply skilled at exploiting people's anxieties for personal gain.
And that brings us back to the core question of this show, right?
It does.
Grifter or gifted.
Yeah.
Is RFK Jr. a force for good or a master manipulator?
That's a question we'll continue to grapple with as we move forward.
Sure.
But I think it's fair to say that he's a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
A reminder that even those who claim to be fighting for the truth can sometimes lead us astray.
God, it feels like we've gone down so many different paths just trying to make sense of RFK Jr. We've talked about his environmental activism, his controversial stance on vaccines, his political ambitions, even his family legacy.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I'm still kind of wrestling with this whole grifter or gifted question.
Yeah, and I think that's the right place to be, honestly. It's tempting to want a simple answer.
Right.
To neatly categorize someone as one or the other.
Right.
But the reality is often much more nuanced than that.
Yeah, especially with someone like RFK Jr. Oh, yeah. I mean, there are these moments where he seems like a genuine advocate, fighting for what he believes in, even if it's unpopular. And then there are other times where his claims just seem so outlandish, so detached from reality.
Yeah.
That it's hard to take him seriously.
It is. It's that inconsistency that makes him so fascinating and so frustrating. You see glimpses of the idealism that's associated with the Kennedy name, and then you see this embrace of conspiracy theories and this willingness to align himself with people who seem to be actively undermining democratic institutions.
It's like he's constantly straddling this line between genuine concern and something that feels more cynical, more self-serving.
It does.
I keep thinking about those old sayings, like a stopped clock is right twice a day.
Right.
Or like the broken clock one, even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Yeah.
Is it possible that some of his concerns are valid?
Sure.
Even if solutions are off base or his methods are questionable,
It's absolutely possible.
Yeah.
I think it's important to remember that even people who promote harmful ideas can sometimes tap into into real anxieties and grievances,
right.
you know?
Yeah.
In RFK Jr.'s case, his distrust of institutions,
Right.
his skepticism of big pharma, his concern about environmental degradation.
Yeah.
These are all issues that resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not like those concerns came out of nowhere.
It didn't.
You know, we've seen plenty of examples of corruption and abuse of power within institutions.
Oh, yeah.
You know, both public and private.
For sure.
So it's understandable that people might be skeptical of those in authority.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And when those in power fail to address those legitimate concerns,
Right.
you know, when they dismiss people's anxieties or try to silence dissenting voices,
Right.
it creates this vacuum that someone like RFK Jr. can step into.
Yeah.
You know, he offers this simple narrative, this clear enemy to blame for all of our problems, and for people who are feeling disillusioned and powerless.
Yeah.
That can be very seductive.
So it's not just about him like being charismatic or persuasive. It's about tapping into this deeper cultural unease.
It is
This sense that something is fundamentally broken in our society.
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
He's not just creating this distrust out of thin air.
Okay.
He's channeling something that's already there.
Right.
Something that's been brewing for a long time.
Okay, so if we acknowledge that some of his concerns might be valid,
Yeah.
how do we separate the wheat from the chaff?
Yeah.
How do we engage with those legitimate anxieties
Yeah.
without getting sucked into the vortex of misinformation and conspiracy theories?
That's the $1 million question, and it's something we all have to grapple with.
Yeah.
You know, not just in relation to RFK Jr., but in our daily lives,
Right.
we're bombarded with information from all sides.
Yeah.
And it's becoming increasingly difficult to discern what's true and what's not.
It feels like we're all playing this constant game of spot the grifter.
We are, yeah.
And the stakes are getting higher all the time.
They are. The consequences of falling for misinformation are real.
Yeah.
We've seen it with the anti-vaccine movement,
Right.
which RFK Jr. has been a prominent voice in.
Yeah.
The spread of false information about vaccines has led to outbreaks of preventable diseases.
Right.
You know, putting people's lives at risk.
And it's not just about, health issues.
Right.
I mean, misinformation can erode trust in democratic institutions.
They can.
It can fuel political polarization and even incite violence.
Yeah.
So it's not something we can afford to ignore. So what can we do?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that we're all susceptible to misinformation.
Okay.
You know, we all have biases,
Yes.
and we all tend to seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs.
Right.
So the first step is to be aware of our own vulnerabilities.
Right. Like checking ourselves before we wreck ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about being willing to question our own assumptions,
Right.
and to be open to the possibility that we might be wrong.
So it's not about becoming these all-knowing fact checkers.
Yeah.
It's more about cultivating this healthy skepticism.
Yes.
And being willing to consider different perspectives.
Exactly. And that means being willing to engage with people who hold different views than our own,
Right.
even if those views make us uncomfortable.
Okay, but how do you do that without getting sucked into like an endless debate or feeling like you're just banging your head against a wall?
It's not easy, but I think the key is to approach those conversations with curiosity and empathy.
Okay.
You know, instead of trying to win the argument,
Right.
try to understand where the other person is coming from.
Okay.
What are their fears? What are their experiences? What information are they basing their beliefs on?
So it's about listening
Yes.
as much as it is about talking.
Absolutely. And it's about recognizing that changing someone's mind is a process.
Yeah.
Not a one-time event.
Right.
You know, it requires patience, respect,
Yeah.
and a willingness to build relationships even across ideological divides.
It's interesting. We started this whole deep dive trying to figure out if RFK Jr. is a grifter or gifted.
We did.
But maybe the more important question is how do we become more discerning consumers of information ourselves?
Right.
How do we develop the critical thinking skills that we need
Yeah.
to navigate this increasingly complex and confusing world?
That's a fantastic point.
Yeah.
Because ultimately it's not just about one individual. It's about all of us taking responsibility for the information we consume and the choices we make based on that information.
So maybe the real takeaway from RFK Jr.'s story isn't about him at all.
Maybe not.
Maybe it's about us and the choices that we make every day as citizens, as consumers, as human beings, trying to make sense of the world around us.
I think that's a powerful insight.
Yeah.
And it's something I hope our listeners will continue to reflect on long after this episode is over.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground today, from the complexities of RFK Jr.'s life and career to the broader challenges of navigating misinformation and discerning truth in the digital age. And hopefully, we've given you some tools and some perspectives that will help you continue your own deep dive into this fascinating and ever-evolving world.
It is.
And as always, we encourage you to keep asking questions.
Yeah.
To keep challenging your own assumptions.
For sure.
And to keep seeking out diverse perspectives.
Absolutely.
Because in a world where charisma and controversy collide, the ability to think critically and discern truth from fiction is more important than ever.
It is. And on that note, we'll leave you with a final thought.
Okay.
In a world where information is power, who are you going to trust?